problem. So hi, I'm Louise. I'm a procurement officer here at South Lanarkshire Council, and I'm going to be the procurement lead for implementing the new dynamic purchasing system. So today's first half of the session, we're just going to sort of talk through the procurement processes behind the new agreement. So here's our agenda for today, where we're going to start off by talking over the requirements that the council has in regards to taxi contracts. We're then going to give you some information on what a DPS is and why we've chosen this type of agreement. Then we're going to give you some information on how to apply for the DPS and the expected timescales that we have for this at the moment. And we're going to finish up then by talking briefly about how we actually award taxi contracts. So first of all, we're going to talk about why we have and need a procurement agreement in place and what opportunities that this dynamic purchasing system can bring to taxi providers. So every year we have so many taxi contract opportunities available. Most of them will be within the South Lanarkshire Council area, where we have 4 localities. So this is Hamilton, Clydesdale, East Kilbride, Cambuslang and Rutherglen. However, when required, some of the drop-off or pick-up points might be out with the South Lanarkshire Council area. Our taxi requirements are going to cover all of our council resources. However, the majority of these are going to be for our education and social work resources, with most of the contracts being for school transportation services. Most of our users, they're going to be pupils with additional support needs, which might include complex medical needs and behaviours. So our pupils will have a broad range of additional support needs, which might include complex autism, complex medical needs, distressed behaviours, visual and hearing impairments, and some mobility issues as well. So it's really important that our contractors, our drivers and our escorts are prepared to work with both the parents and carers and the school staff in order to support the pupils throughout their transport journeys. And it's also really important that you are available to attend any training sessions that are offered by the school establishments. Because of some of the complex needs of the pupils, we might consider actually lotting the DPS. However, more details of this will be provided within the instructions to tender. The majority of our contracts, as I said, are for school transportation, and these will be to the council's additional support needs bases. So we have 7 standalone special schools, 27 ASN bases, and 8 social, emotional and behavioural bases throughout South Lanarkshire Council. And the contracts are going to involve a mix of transportation of primary, secondary and preschool children. So just to provide a little bit of context, we've gave some details here of the contracts that we required for our current school term. So we actually awarded these contracts by carrying out mini competitions, and these mini competitions, they might be required at any time throughout the year. However, the majority of our contracts are published on a yearly basis, starting off round about Easter time, and these continue into the summer prior to the beginning of the new school term. So for school term 2024-25, we published 6 mini competitions in total, and that contained 214 contracts. So the contracts that we tendered through these mini competitions were mainly for transportation to secondary and primary schools that had additional support needs bases. However, some of the contracts that we do tender might include other establishments as well, such as early learning units, colleges and social work establishments. All of the mini competitions will be published on Public Contract Scotland tender, and they will be more precise in the details, including things such as the number of passengers required, if there's any wheelchair or escort requirements. The appointed providers will then have the chance to bid for the contracts that they find suitable for them. So why are we using a DPS? So the council actually hasn't used a dynamic purchasing system before for our taxi requirements. As some of you probably are aware, our current procurement arrangement is actually a framework. So we decided to use a DPS this time round because ultimately we want to encourage more providers to work with the council. With a framework, we have no ability to add on any new suppliers during that framework period, whereas with a DPS, suppliers can apply to be appointed at any time during the DPS period. We did actually carry out a survey and we asked taxi providers if they would prefer a framework or a dynamic purchasing system, and the responses that we got back highlighted that providers liked the fact that they would have the chance to reapply if their application was unsuccessful if we used the DPS. Again, with the framework, we don't have this opportunity. They also liked that it was a longer term arrangement than a framework. So a framework is actually limited to a term of 4 years, whereas with a DPS, it can be open for much longer. So the dynamic purchasing system that we are implementing is likely going to remain open for in place between 5 to 10 years. A DPS is also more user-friendly for smaller organisations because all you need to do to apply is submit the single procurement document, and we're going to discuss this a little bit more in more detail in the upcoming slides. So a DPS is similar to a framework in some ways, such as multiple suppliers will be appointed to it. It is a two-stage process, with the first stage being the initial setup of the DPS and the appointment to the DPS, and the second stage will actually be the individual contracts that are awarded through mini competitions. For the initial setup, an invitation to tender will be published on Public Contract Scotland Tender, and this will be open for a minimum of 30 calendar days. And this is where you'll have the opportunity to apply to be appointed onto the DPS. And this will be done by submitting the single procurement document. After the closing date, your single procurement document will then be assessed, and it will be assessed on a pass or fail basis, so there's no scoring or ranking involved in this. You're then going to be notified if your application has been successful or unsuccessful, and we are actually going to discuss some of the expected timescales for this a little bit later on. The really good thing about this is that if you have been unsuccessful, you can always reapply. So straight after the initial closing date, another invitation to tender is going to be made permanently open for you to reapply at any time throughout the DPS period. So for the second stage, providers whose applications have been successful and they are therefore appointed to the DPS, you will then get to be invited to mini competitions where you can then have the opportunity to bid for individual contracts. So all of our contracts in the dynamic purchasing system are going to be awarded by mini competitions. There's no option for us to direct award with the DPS. A really important reminder as well is that there's no guarantee of you receiving contracts or delivering services to the council just from being appointed to the dynamic purchasing system alone. You'll only be able to deliver these services if you've been awarded a contract following a mini competition. So just to make the two stages of the DPS a little bit clearer, we've sectioned them out into these tables for you. So stage one is your application to the dynamic purchasing system. This is where you'll submit your single procurement document to apply to the DPS. And if your application is successful, you will then be issued with a letter of appointment that confirms your appointment onto our DPS. If you are unsuccessful, you will also be notified, but you will have the opportunity to reapply at any time. Again, just to kind of drill it in, it's really important that you remember that there's no guarantee of you receiving contracts and delivering services to the council through just your appointment only. The actual commitment will come from the award via a mini competition. So that takes us on to the second stage, and this is where contracts are awarded following a mini competition. So the council's individual contract requirements, again, are going to be published on Public Contract Scotland Tender. Appointed DPS providers will then get invited to these relevant mini competitions where you can have the opportunity to bid for the contracts that you want. After the closing date of the mini competition, all of the bids are going to be evaluated based on the most economically advantageous tender. All bidders are then going to be notified if they were successful or unsuccessful, and the winning bidders can then receive a letter of award confirming their contract award. So here is a couple of the key terms that you're going to hear, you might have already heard throughout these slides. So first up, we've got the ITT, which is your invitation to tender. And these are just basically the documents that set out all of the council's requirements. Then got the SPD, and this is the single procurement document. And this is the questionnaire that will allow us to identify suitably qualified suppliers. Again, this will be the questionnaire that you're going to complete for your application to the DPS. We've then got the Supplier Development Programme, SDP, and they're here with us today, of course. They're going to give you a little session a little bit later on, but they're basically here to provide free help and advice on public sector tendering. Then, of course, we've got DPS, which stands for Dynamic Purchasing System, and this is ultimately an umbrella arrangement for multiple suppliers. Then there's the phrase mini competition. So this is where we will set out our specific requirements and contracts for you to bid on. For example, they might include details such as the number of passengers that are required, any pickup or drop-off points, required times, things like that. Then you'll hear the word applicant a lot. So this is actually the organisation that will be applying to the DPS. So hopefully that will be all of you. You will be applicants. And then we've got appointed provider. And this refers to an organisation that has actually been appointed to the DPS. So they've been successful in their application. And then that means they will be invited to many competitions. We've then got MEET, which is the most economically advantageous tender. And this is actually how we evaluate the bids that we receive on many competitions. It's actually based on a combination of both price and quality. The weightings for each of these will always be made clear within the invitation to tender documents. So as previously mentioned, your appointment to the Dynamic Purchasing System will require you to complete and submit the single procurement document. This is basically a standard questionnaire that has set questions from the Scottish Government, and by us asking these questions, it allows us to identify suitably qualified and experienced suppliers. The SPD is going to contain a list of both exclusion and selection criteria. So the exclusion criteria involves evaluating whether the supplier has committed any offences that would then lead them to being excluded from the application process. There are both mandatory and discretionary exclusions. So, for example, mandatory grounds includes things such as corruption and bribery. And discretionary grounds are things that are going to cover that are relevant to the actual contract. So things like having the appropriate disclosures in place. Then the selection criteria refers to the minimum requirements or the standards that the suppliers must meet in order to progress further into the procurement exercise. So if the suppliers can't demonstrate that they meet all of the minimum requirements that are set out, then we will have to consider excluding them from the process. So again, if you do fail the SPD and you are unsuccessful with your application, you're always going to have the opportunity to reapply. So accessing the single procurement document or the ITT. So the invitation to tender for applications to the DPS is going to be published on Public Contract Scotland Tender. So really important, make sure that you're registered on this site if you've not already done so. And we've included a little link here for you to access it. Once the DPS is live, you will then be able to access the invitation to tender and complete the single procurement document. And we're going to actually talk about the expected timescales for this on the next slide. It's really important that you include all of your relevant attachments within your submission. So the invitation to tender is actually going to outline all the required attachments that you must upload alongside your submission. And in failure to include these attachments may result in an unsuccessful application. It's also really important that you submit your response before the deadline that's stated on the invitation to tender, as any late submissions will not be considered by us. This is really relevant in terms of the initial invitation to tender for the DPS. However, after the initial ITT is closed, a new one is going to be made permanently open for you to reapply at any time with no deadlines. So this was only a really brief overview of the SPD. The Supplier Development Programme are going to be holding an online session to discuss this with you in more detail, and they can provide you with free help and advice and assistance. At the moment, we do have this scheduled in for the 14th of January 2025. However, depending on when we actually publish the invitation to tender, it might be subject to change. So here we've listed some of the expected timelines for the initial application to the dynamic purchasing system. So we expect the ITT to be published in either this December 2024 or January 2025. Like I said previously, the Supplier Development Programme will hold an aligned tender training event to provide you with some help and advice in the application process. And again, it's currently scheduled in for the 14th of January 2025, however, could be subject to change. After the ITT has been published, your submission of the single procurement document will need to be received before the deadline. We will have the invitation to tender open for a minimum of 30 days, but we will actually give you note of when your submissions need to be received by. We then expect the ITT to close sometime in February 2025, and we're going to aim to review all the submissions that we've received within 30 working days. However, this might be longer if we require any additional information. Sorry, I said working days there, I meant calendar days, sorry. After all the submissions have been received, we're going to notify all the applicants of the outcome, and this is going to be expected in March of 2025. All the outcomes and communications are going to be sent through the messaging area of Public Contract Scotland tender, so make sure that you familiarise yourself with the site. So given the expected timeline, we're hoping that we have the dynamic purchasing system live in March 2025. So after the initial ITT has closed, we will publish another ITT, and that is going to remain permanently open for all new applications or anyone to reapply. This will be published the day following the initial closing date, so it's likely to be sometime in February 2025. You can apply or reapply by submitting the single procurement document any time during the DPS period. And then we aim to review new submissions within 10 working days. However, this might be longer if we require any additional information. After all the submissions have been reviewed, we're then again going to notify all the applicants of the outcome through the messaging area on Public Contract Scotland tender. For any unsuccessful applicants, remember, you can reapply at any time, so we would encourage that you do reapply as soon as you possibly can. For the successful applicants, that it will then be you appointed to the DPS, and you will be invited to our future mini competitions, again through Public Contract Scotland tender. So now we're going to just talk through the process that we have for awarding actual individual contracts. So after we have created the dynamic purchasing system and it's live, the providers that have been successfully appointed to the DPS will be invited to the mini competitions in order to bid for contract opportunities. So we hope to start publishing these mini competitions from the new DPS round about Easter time of next year. The mini competitions will be published again on Public Contract Scotland tender. However, our education resources may actually have additional requirements that could be published on Public Contract Scotland, so please make sure you're registered on both sites. They are two separate sites. The mini competitions are going to contain both technical, which otherwise is known as quality, and commercial, known as price criteria. And we will make the technical questions as straightforward as we possibly can, and we're going to be completely transparent about the scoring methodology that we're going to use, and all these details will be included in the invitation to tender. Further information on the mini competition criteria will follow at a later date, and we aim to hold another session in Easter of next year, round about Easter, that will hopefully provide you with some further information on how we're actually going to carry out the mini competitions in the process. So all of our mini competitions will be evaluated on the most economically advantageous tender, and this involves considering both your commercial and your technical submissions. At the moment, this is likely to be weighted as 90% price and 10% quality. However, the weightings of each will be confirmed within each mini competition invitation to tender. If you submit a bid for a mini competition, you're always going to be notified by the outcome. If you're successful in being awarded a contract, you will receive a letter of award confirming this. So we have a couple of top tips here just to hopefully make the process as easy as possible for you. So first of all, it's really important that you make sure that you're registered on both Public Contract Scotland and Public Contract Scotland Tender. Like I said, these are both different sites. All of our invitations to tender are going to be published on PCST. However, any important notifications such as contract notices will be issued on PCS alongside any of education's mini comp requirements. And again, for any of you that have already seen, we do have a PIN notice, otherwise known as a prior information notice, already published on PCS. So hopefully some of you have seen that. Another key point to make is to make sure that you allow plenty of time for your application. This is something that we see quite a lot. Some of you might be new to public sector tendering, so please make sure that you allow yourself plenty of time to navigate both sites and give yourself enough time to submit your application, which will include attaching any relevant attachments and documentation. It's also really important that you make sure that you've included, like I said, all the relevant attachments alongside your single procurement document submission. We've listed a few of the attachments here that are likely going to be included within our ITT, but the ITT will clearly list all the attachments that you need to include with your response. So please make sure that you read the instruction to tendering clearly and that you include any relevant attachments, otherwise your submission might get rejected. And always remember that you can seek advice on public sector tendering from the Supplier Development Programme if you're unsure on anything. If you have any queries that relate specifically to the ITT, then we would ask that you use the messaging area on Public Contract Scotland Tender to communicate with us. This area will be within the ITT when it's published, and it allows you to communicate with us directly. And this leads us on to just making sure that you reply to us as soon as possible if you receive any messages from us on PCST, because sometimes this can cause quite a lot of delays as well. So just another note that after we publish the ITT for the Dynamic Purchasing System, the Supplier Development Programme are going to be holding an online aligned training, tender training session event, If you are going to submit an application to the DPS, then I would really recommend that you attend this session. It will provide you with more information on navigating PCST and being able to locate the ITT. It will also provide you with useful application information as well. Again, we hope that this will be the 14th of January 2025, currently scheduled in for 5 p.m. However, it will be dependent on when we publish the ITT, but we will notify you of any changes. So we're going to hold off on the questions just now until Fran has delivered her presentation, but I just wanted to let you know that these slides are going to be uploaded onto Public Contract Scotland, and these will be contained within the prior information notice that has already been published. We also held an in-person event on Tuesday there, where we received some questions, so we're going to upload a question and answer sheet which will contain some of the commonly asked questions that we've received over both of these events. So hopefully, and also as well, this is recorded so you can receive that as well. But that is me finished for my half